simply for the benefit of allowing us to wade through tonight's different public engagement tool. I do have the authority as chair to limit comments from a length perspective, and if I need to do so, I normally don't like to, I will. Number 4, from the board's perspective, all seconding of motions, if you could please help me out by physically raising your hand as you do so. I'd like to help Laura make sure that the record is clear. Lastly, as you just saw from our motion related to the minutes, all voting tonight will be via roll call. That is just how we're going to have to do it to ensure a clarity of record. I will say that right now we do have 2 of our alternates sitting in. If Brian Williams joins the meeting, I'm going to ask, I believe, Nassim, you were the last one in. If you could consider yourself more of a member of the public tonight, I would appreciate that. So for clarity, if Mr. Williams does show, he would be a voting member of the board. I know this will be a different experience for all of us tonight. I'm perhaps more than anybody keenly aware of that as I try and essentially herd the cats on video screens. But I know we can get through this together. I know we can do it correctly, and I thank you in advance for any assistance. With that, in a look at the agenda, Jana, it is my understanding that 2 items, well, particularly one project, 219 Elm Street, which is the All Seasons project, which is a community impact study review and a preliminary site plan review, unfortunately did not have proper signage in place to adequately notice for tonight's meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. It came to our attention yesterday that there was not a notice sign on the property.
I do understand that this appears to be just an oversight, so I do take no issue. But because of the lack of notice, we are unable to discuss either of those items tonight. I therefore ask the board for 2 motions. One, if you will allow me to move this to the beginning, one is to amend the rules of procedure for our meeting on May 13th, 2020, to allow the review of site plans. And 2, a motion to postpone both the community impact study and the preliminary site plan of 219 Elm Street to May 13th, 2020. Do I have such a motion?
Moved.
Both motions moved by Mr. Boyle, or joint motion moved by Mr. Boyle. Is there any second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Jeffries. Thank you. Is there any conversation amongst the board about the motion? Hearing none, could we please call the roll?
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
Yes.
Bert Kosek,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyd,
Yes.
Scott Klein.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. So those 2 items will be pushed to the May 13th, 2020 meeting. Let us move along to old business. Jana, we have first item would be a preliminary site plan review for 35001 Woodward, which is affectionately known as the parking lots at Hunter House site.
Correct. Can everybody see the plan that's up on their screen?
Yes.
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 Okay, excellent. All right, then I will start. This is, just to recap, what we call the Hunter House site in the parking lots at the corner of Maple and Big Woodward, 3501 and 3575 Woodward Avenue. If you recall, well, it's been to the planning board several times before. It came in 2019. At that time, it was proposed to be a hotel, a 5-story mixed-use building with a hotel. They then came back before the board, if you recall, earlier this year, I think it was January 22nd, they came before the board and they wanted to amend their community impact study and amend their preliminary site plan. They had decided to go from a 5-story hotel mixed use to a 5-story mixed use building with first floor retail, and then office and residential units above. They have since submitted revised plans, if you recall. They came before the board. At that time, the board did review the entire CIS, the Community Impact Study, and did move to accept the Community Impact Study with several conditions. You moved on to the preliminary site plan review. At that time, we went through the whole review, and I don't want to go through it again now unless somebody asks me to. I'm happy to. Just to summarize for anybody that's new, there's 2 floors of underground parking proposed in the building, 82 parking spaces on those lower levels. Then there is a first floor, which includes some retail space. And then we have the upper floors, which if I can just get the paperwork out here. The upper floors are all let's see, we have an office floor, and then we have residential units, a total of 42 residential units on the upper floor. Because this site is in the parking assessment district, they are only required to provide parking for the residential units. Based on the number of residential units proposed at 42, they need 60 parking spaces. They're providing 82. So overall, they're definitely over their parking requirements. And what they came for before included a parking lot, a surface parking lot that was on the first floor, entering and exiting onto Hamilton. That was described to the board previously as an arrangement that had been put in place to provide 3 parking spaces at grade for the Hunter House, which is incorporated into the development on the corner. Hunter House is still on the corner. You can see on the screen that's in front of you here, they're still proposing the Hunter House restaurant to be located here. Still the same retail space that was over here, still the ramp going down to the lower levels of parking. And previously there was an entry point off of Hamilton here, and there were 3 parking spaces that were located in this area. There was no connection between this surface parking area and this ramp area that you enter off of Park Street. There was a lot of discussion, obviously, by the board, and there were several concerns that were raised. When you pulled into here, there were 3 parking spaces. If they were full, there was no way to get out. You would either have to reverse onto Hamilton or somehow do a multi-point turn in here and get out. The board had several concerns about that. They felt that, one, it wasn't necessary because they're already meeting their parking requirements. Also, that it did not meet all of the requirements for the site plan review due to safety concerns, functional and operational concerns. And the board essentially postponed the hearing and asked the applicant to go back and reconfigure the first floor space to remove the surface level parking lot and add another retail space in its place. And essentially the board consensus was, for the most part, that if that was done, that would clean up a lot of the issues that you were having with regards to the vehicular safety and entry exit onto Hamilton. So they have done that. They've reconfigured the first floor a little bit. They have changed the footprint of the Hunter House. As you recall, when the Hunter House was here before, they had indicated that they believed that their space was too small and they needed more room in order to meet the health department standards. So the applicant has gone back and met with the Hunter House folks. I know you'll have more to hear on that. So stay tuned for that. But my understanding is the plans have been changed to expand the Hunter House space here, remove the parking lot, and add a new retail space, which now fronts onto Park. So that is what they've proposed. The applicant is available if you want to hear from them. I think that's about it in terms of the changes. Some of the other issues are still there that we had gone through before. For instance, we do need to see specification sheets on the rooftop mechanical and the ground mounted mechanical equipment that's in the corner here. We need to make sure that those units are not going to be too high. A, go over the height limit on the roof, or B, make sure there's enough screening to fully cover the height of that unit. Also, there's still the remaining issue with regards to the loading spaces here. I know I've talked to the applicant's architect a few times, and they've indicated that they think that the spaces meet the requirements. They're a foot too short in terms of length. I think that can be corrected. If it can't be, then they would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and get a variance for the undersized zoning spaces. Also, we would need to see a photometric plan at the time of final site plan review, but that is something we usually do at final. All of the departments have reviewed all of the revised plans, and basically most of them have the same comments that they had last time. Some of their concerns still exist. They don't have any concerns about the removal of the parking lot off of Hamilton, except for the police department, who has indicated they are concerned about the parking being proposed on the site. They do understand that it meets the zoning ordinance requirements, however. Also, the engineering department had indicated that there are two inconsistencies on the plan sheet. That plan sheet L1 did not seem to be the most current sheet, so they have asked that that be changed. Now, we don't do a design review at this point, preliminary site plan, obviously, but we usually go through and identify any issues that there may be. When we discussed this last time, we did mention there was a glazing issue. The glazing requirements weren't met on one side, one of the elevations of the building. The applicant has revised that now with the changes, and they do meet all of the glazing requirements on the first floor and on the upper floors. The only thing I would note is that on the elevation plans, each elevation is labeled, I believe, as the east elevation, even though there's north, south, east, west. So if they could correct that, that would be great. And then I guess I would open it up to board comment.
Excellent. Jana, is it the recommendation of the planning staff at this?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the recommendation of the planning staff is that you consider approval of the preliminary site plan review with the following conditions. One, that they submit specification sheets on all of the proposed rooftop mechanical units and ground-mounted mechanical units to ensure full screening. Two, that they submit plans showing the 3 proper-sized off-street loading spaces or obtain a video or a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. Submit a photometric plan for final site plan review. Also, that they comply with the requests of all departments. One of the main ones there being the spacing seems to be a little off with regards to some of the street trees and lights. So we just want to make sure the streetscape plan is revised to meet what we're doing on Maple Road, which it does for the most part, and correct those issues with spacing. And also, one thing I didn't touch on tonight is to the fact that the northwest corner of the site is actually on city-owned property. There's where the current parking lot is now. That is city property that has been in the past leased by Hunter House. It's not currently being leased by anybody right now. The lease has expired. But in order to move forward with this development, the applicant would have to enter into a lease agreement with the city for the use of that parking area, both below grade, at grade, and above grade. So that would be one of the recommended conditions for approval. And lastly, that the planning board consider approving the 2-foot overhangs that are occurring at both this corner here on the northeast corner of the building and also along the Maple facade. If you recall, we amended the ordinance to allow projections and overhangs, and the planning board can approve up to 2-foot projections over the right-of-way, and that's what this is at, so that you are able to approve that without them having to go and get any other approvals for that. So we would recommend approval with those conditions.
Excellent. Board, are there any questions for Jana related to the report? Hold on, Mr. Williams, just one moment. Let the record show that Mr. Williams has joined the meeting. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with the specific, and I hinted at this the last meeting, I'm uncomfortable with the specific references to, quote, the Hunter House, end quote, in the site plan drawings. I don't think it's a requirement that we need to specify the specific location of the Hunter House. I would simply recommend we not do that, and that we, as in the southern portion of the building, it's simply listed as retail on the plans. I would simply show on the northeast corner additional retail, and I delete the 2 references to the Hunter House. There are also Hunter House references, as I see it, including but not limited to pages 54, 60, 63, and 64 of the materials.
Look on there when they call me.
And Mr. Williams,
And I would simply say that I would add that as condition 8, should there be a motion for approval, that there be a deletion of all reference specifically to the Hunter House on the first floor plan, which is page 54, simply leaving it as additional retail for the 2,650 square feet, and delete the references on the visuals of the site plan at pages 60, 63, and 64. I don't think we need to get into that, and I don't think we should.
Mr. Williams, do you have a concern referencing the Hunter House site, because it would imply that we're approving in some fashion the size and location of that particular site, given there does not seem to be approval between the parties?
That's
Please.
correct.
Okay.
And I don't want to get the planning board into the position of in effect approving a specific location for the Hunter House and a specific square footage size. There is sufficient retail available in the building. That's what we should be approving. It is not a requirement, as I understand it. Jana, you can comment on the ordinance, that we specify tenants and specific tenant locations. Sometimes we have, but I don't think it's a requirement of the ordinance. And I think under the circumstances where we now have the letter, and I'm not sure whether there's been a motion to admit the letter of April 21st from the Hunter House into the record. If there isn't, we should make one.
We have not yet, Mr. Williams. We were just getting going when you joined. So,
To answer the first question, there is not a requirement that you name the tenant. That's correct.
So I would move that we delete all reference to the Hunter House specifically in the plans and in the drawings. And let me first make a motion that the board receive and file for the record a letter dated April 21, 2020 from Kelly William Cobb, Vice President of Hunter House Hamburgers, copy of which the board has received, but I don't know that it's included in the materials that the public has seen.
we have a motion by Mr. Williams. Is there a second by a board member to include this in the packet?
Second.
A second by Mr. Boyle. Any conversation amongst the board? Hearing and seeing none, I will, Mr. Scher, you have your hand up. I apologize.
Yeah, thank you. Are there other letters that we need to include in this as well? I know we received a variety of materials over the past few days.
If I could respond, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
All of the letters are included in the packet. The only one that came in was the one from Mr. Cobb dated April 21st that Mr. Williams just referenced.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments on the motion? Hearing none, could we please call the roll?
Brian Williams.
Yes.
Robin Boyle.
Yes.
Scott Klein.
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries. He's muted.
Yep,
Stuart Jeffries.
Yes.
Bert Kosek.
Yes.
Daniel Scher.
Yes,
Janelle Whipple-Boyce.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That will be filed and put into the official record. Any other questions from the planning board before I ask if the applicant would like to step forward and make any other comments? I'm not seeing any hands up at this motion or at this moment. Oh, Mr. Scher?
yes. Jana, did the police department have any suggestion, or they simply noted what they were, noted their comment?
No, they did not have any suggestions. They just indicated that when they are not required to provide parking for the commercial uses on site, it does tend to lead to complaints down the road.
Okay. Any other questions by the board? I believe the applicant is on video tonight. I did see him.
Yes, I am looking for him right now.
Mr. Gare, I think he's near the end of the list there, sir.
I think Mr. Biddison is also here, who I imagine would be speaking.
Oh, wonderful. That's right.
I'm just trying to locate him.
There you go.
Kevin's iPad, potentially.
Yep. Mr. Biddison, are you here on behalf of this applicant?
Yes, I am, if you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add on behalf of the applicant, or would your client like to add in regard to the report tonight?
Sure. Just real briefly, I just, wanted to say a couple of things. We did hear you the last time, and we did take to heart what you had said regarding the site specifically in terms of circulation and traffic and parking and all of those things. And we also took to heart the fact that, we did have a couple of meetings, even in the midst of all of the things that are going on with the Hunter House group. And actually, there's an updated plan to the one that you have there, where you see the blue, which includes those two smaller parking areas and the area to the left of the stair. So an increased area just in our discussions with Hunter House that represents, an attempt to make this thing move forward. And what it really does is it gives Hunter House, if they choose, essentially the area that was previously their property, to do what they want with. They can expand their business. They have plenty of room to meet any ordinances or health department codes, plus have an equal size additional lease space if they require. They have a couple of parking spaces and trash areas that are off of the building, areas where we have our loading zones. And we recognize that the 14 spaces that we've all talked about in the past were just something that was really not going to happen. The surface parking is something that's not allowed by the city ordinance, and it's not required by the city ordinance. And the underground parking just did not work for them and was not a good idea for the project. So that additional space was offered as a part of our conversations about trying to get things to move forward. So we're not going to address the comments in the letter. We've all read that. But I just wanted to, say that we feel that this plan meets the ordinance. We feel that it meets the spirit of what the city of Birmingham would like to see on this corner. And, we would ask that, if you all feel the same, we would ask for approval of this site plan tonight. We, the additional drawings that I did shoot you a copy of, Jana, does show the two interior 10 by 40 loading zone areas, and we will definitely be taking care of the photometric and making sure all the screening and streetscape stuff meets all the current requirements for all of those things. We will in the future, assuming that we are approved tonight, going forward with final site plan and beyond, if it's the desire of the board to take off all reference to specific users within the building. Other than that, I'm very happy to answer any additional questions you might have. I think we've covered most of those questions in the past, but I'm more than happy to answer anything that I can.
Thank you, Mr. Biddison. Any questions for the project architect from the board? I do not see any hands popping up. Anything further, Mr. Biddison, from you or your client, or should we move on to public comment?
I think we can move on to public comment if you're...
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so at this time, to the public, if there is anyone who would like to speak on this issue, please use your raise your hand functionality within Zoom, and I will do my absolute best here. And I see that Mr. Cobb has raised his hand. Please, Mr. Cobb, you are on. If you could state your name and community of residence for the record officially, I would appreciate it.
Okay, hold on. It appears he's muted. Let me see what I can do about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
There you go.
Kelly Cobb, Hunter House Ambers. I sent in a letter, basically, I think you've all seen it. I feel obligated to just state publicly and clearly, and I understand the reasons why removing us from the plan is in your interest to do so. I think it muddies the water on our end, frankly. But we're in no better position than we were last time. And that is an unfortunate situation, I think, that we find ourselves in. Arguably, there are more problems with the removal of the parking, which I know was to satisfy what the planning board would like to see. But I can't help myself but stress the fact, as I said last time at the meeting, that there are 3 parties here. And by contractual and property right, my approval rights are as equal as they are to yours, unless by some regulation, as we all know in law, they trump mine. And the reality here is that what the agreement, what the deeded restrictions state are that we're supposed to bring this as a team to you. And that has not been able to be done because we're not in agreement over what this is supposed to look like from our end, and we've never been able to get there. I don't want to go through all the problems except to say that I think you all know where this is headed, and it's not in a good place. I'm trying my best to work through issues with the applicant. It has been a struggle with moving goalposts, to say the least. I do want to clarify one thing, actually 2 quick things though. We never said that underground parking is unacceptable. I think unacceptable is receiving no parking, which we're contractually have a right to receive. And I also want to clarify a comment that Kevin said that he's giving us our property back. But they're not. It's very clear where the Hunter House property line is that bisects that side of the building and separates the municipal lot with our property. And they're clearly putting retail footprint for the purposes of the development onto our property. And so I just wholeheartedly disagree with that as well. And I outlined the reasons why in my letter. And I understand where the board's at. I don't want to fight with the board. You're not my enemy. This community has been my friend for longer than I've been alive. I just hate to see the direction that this takes for all of us. And it's not a healthy place for development in Birmingham to have this go forward the way that it has. And I'll leave my comments at that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cobb. I appreciate your comments as always. Any other members of the public wish to comment on this particular application? I see no hands going up. So with one quick last look, one last scroll, and we will bring it back to the board. Board, we have seen this a number of times. The applicant has has listened to us with regard to some of the changes. I would be remiss if I didn't very quickly address the letter that was submitted by Mr. Cobb and his comments tonight. Very briefly, just with an understanding of our role in this process, I certainly personally understand Mr. Cobb's frustration, and it seems it seems very clear to me that communication is just for some reason not working. And I don't mean to pass judgment on that one way or the other, but there seems to be just a terrible impasse, and that saddens me. Mr. Cobb, you should know that this board is certainly in no way the enemy of Hunter House. However, we have rules to follow, and we do have direction from the city attorney that it is not the city's domain to enforce private contract law or restrictions on property that are from private contracts. And unfortunately, we have a case where we do have an applicant with legal rights to submit a site plan and a legal right to be heard for approval. So with that, I would look to the board for any conversation that it would like to have at this moment on this particular topic. Is there anyone that would like to make any comments? Seeing no hands raised. Mr. Williams, my apologies.
So I think that what you have just suggested in terms of in effect, the city attorney's advice as to the rights of the developer / applicant to present a preliminary site plan approval. I would simply say that if, from my perspective, they have complied with most of the requests, and particularly with respect to the access from or the parking spots along the northern property line, which they've removed, which I think is a plus, because I think the board was concerned about that. I would simply say that if we're going to add a condition, that we should delete specific reference to Hunter House, because I don't want to be in the position of inferentially taking the position of the developer that the designation of Hunter House is appropriate, which I don't. At this point, it's clear in the view of Hunter House, it's not.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Any other comments?
Dan Scher is raising his hand.
Mr. Scher. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to say that whatever action we may take on this site plan, should this matter go to a court or some other tribunal for adjudication of the rights as between the Hunter House and the developer, we should not be understood to be taking any position whatsoever or reaching any judgment whatsoever on the merits of whatever dispute those parties should have.
Correct. Very true. Mr. Boyle,
I'd like to make a motion.
please.
I would make a motion to approve the revised preliminary site plan for 35001 and 35075 Woodward, Maple, with the following conditions. These are listed on pages 28 and 29 of our agenda packet. There are 7. Do you wish to read them, or will I just add Mr. Williams' additional condition?
I think it's appropriate, given our circumstances here tonight, to read them for the record, unfortunately.
Okay. Number 1, submit specification sheets on all the proposed rooftop units and material / dimensional information on the screen wall to ensure full screening. Number 2, revise the streetscape plans to meet all city requirements with regards to street lighting, furnishings, and sidewalk. 3, submit plans showing 3 usable off-street loading spaces measuring 40 by 12 by 14, or obtain a variance from the BZA. 4, submit a photometric plan and specifications on all proposed lighting and materials, along with material samples at final site plan and design. 5, work with the city to negotiate a lease for the use of city property below, at, and above grade. 6, the planning board approves the 2-foot projection into the right-of-way for the entry canopy at the corner of Maple and Woodward. 7, comply with the requests of all city departments. Number 8, in all cases, delete the term Hunter House from drawings and any text.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Boyle. Do we have a second?
Support?
We have a support by Mr. Scher?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Support, support by Mr. Scher. Any conversations amongst the board related to the motion? I don't see any hands going up. Any conversation, or we'll take it to the public. Any conversation on the motion itself from the public? I see no hands going up, so we will bring it back to the board. Could we please call the roll?
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Yes.
Brian Williams, Brian Williams,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
Yes.
Scott Klein,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
Yes.
Bert Hosek.
Yes.
Motion is unanimous. Thank you very much. I can only stress to all of the parties our desire for continued communication, and wish that this proposal could be resolved in a manner that is something we can all be very proud of. Thank you very much. We are now going to move along. Item F, rezoning request for 479 South Old Woodward. Now, board, before we we move along to this item, I'm going to use the chairman's discretion, if you will, to make some comments. For much of the past week, I have been reflecting deeply on tonight's meeting. The first, I might add, in a virtual space, trying to prepare myself for the task of chairing such a meeting without being in our usual commission chambers. Invariably, my thoughts have coalesced about the next item on our agenda, the rezoning request for 2 parcels on South Old Woodward that is quite familiar to all of us. You've no doubt seen the correspondence in tonight's packet that asserts that our meeting is somehow inappropriate, or perhaps even not even allowed under the governor's executive order. I also hope that you have read the letter from the city attorney, which outlines the city's position quite to the contrary. I feel it's my responsibility as the chair to simply reiterate, for the record, that the city attorney has opined that the governor's executive order directs the city to continue with the functions of government, which includes our meeting as a planning board, and continue we shall. Having said that, after long and thoughtful consideration of this, I am here right now to respectfully recommend and request that the planning board postpone the public hearing on this petition until May 27th, 2020. That would be our second meeting in the month of May, 1 month from now. I believe that this action is actually the most appropriate course that we can take tonight, and I will explain in the next few moments. Unlike some other matters on our agenda tonight, this rezoning request is likely to draw considerable public input. We have nearly 50 people online, and I can tell you by looking clearly at the names, they are people that are here to comment on this particular item. And while public engagement is a hallmark of our democratic process, I am deeply concerned that the pure volume of comments tonight will significantly test the limits of our abilities, and indeed my ability, to properly leverage the technology we have tonight as I look within our first hour of our first virtual meeting ever. Furthermore, I expect many of the comments the public are going to make tonight will center on the appropriateness of the meeting instead of on the merits of the petition, despite the clear opinion of the city attorney. Now, to be fair, some of this might likely be caused by the fact that that opinion was released on Friday, leaving little time for rebuttal. But nonetheless, this combination of technological inexperience, the volume of public comment, and the focus on procedural matters that I perceive will occur is likely going to greatly hamper our ability to properly document any findings of fact tonight, and would therefore result in a record that emerges with any decision or recommendation we make that at best would be muddled, and at worst, incomplete, leaving the City Commission without an adequate trail or details to truly evaluate our recommendation. In such an event, my fear is that not only would it potentially weaken any decision the City Commission may make in the eyes of the courts, it could leave them no choice but to send this item back to us yet again. And if there's one thing I know everyone in attendance tonight will likely agree upon is that none of us want to have a fourth public hearing on the rezoning of this property at the planning board level. By postponing this meeting until May 27th, the board will have an opportunity to use this technology for the rest of this evening, as well as during our first meeting in May, a hybrid meeting, including public input as well as study session items. And we will likely work out all of the kinks involved in its usage. I am confident with that added experience that it will greatly serve us all, applicant, public, and the board alike, in order to present a clear and complete record to the City Commission. The delay will also allow the parties added time to complete any discussions and submit any other comments to the city attorney related to his opinion, and I hope allow us to focus our discussion on May 27th on the merits of the petition and not on any procedural machinations regarding the meeting itself. Now, I do completely understand and absolutely agree that the applicant has every right to petition the city for the rezoning of his property, and he has every right to be heard. I also want to note that I firmly believe the city has every right to act upon this petition request under the governor's executive order, consistent with the city attorney's recommendations. I simply believe that tonight is not the appropriate night to do so. Let me further state clearly that I think any attempt to delay this petition
Who's a prick?
I think any attempt to delay this petition beyond 1 month for any reason to try and, quote, wait until we meet in public again is highly inappropriate. We simply do not know when that will occur, and it would be an unfair burden to the applicant. But a 1 month delay, in order to ensure that the applicant, the public, and the board is up to snuff on the technology and able to present a clear and accurate record, in my opinion, is not only warranted, but the benefits outweigh the potential negatives. So I therefore respectfully ask this board, before we move any further, to consider a motion to postpone this matter to May 27th, 2020. Board, I know I've thrown quite a bit at you right now, but I'd like to begin the conversation related to what I've just said. Are there?
Looks like Mr. Williams has his hand up.
Mr. Williams?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I do not object to your suggestion. However, I would couple it not necessarily as part of this motion to postpone, but I would request that a council for Birmingham Place Residential Condominium Association and Birmingham Place Commercial Condominium Association, Mr. Howe, and also the council for the applicant submit, if you're going to submit materials, to submit written materials, not on the request to adjourn the hearing or the appropriateness or inappropriateness of a virtual meeting, but on the merits. And I would simply suggest that those materials, in light of a potential postponement, be delivered to the office of the planning department by Tuesday, March 17th. Excuse me, that would be a little by May 19th, which would give the city attorney an opportunity, if necessary, to reply to any legal positions to the extent that he needs to advise the board in time for the materials to be distributed in the ordinary course by Friday, May 22nd. put another way, I would not be real excited about materials coming from either the applicant or anybody opposed after May the 19th, particularly from council. That's my request. If it shows up the night of the meeting, none of us are going to have the opportunity to read it.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Any other comments from board members? Discussion. I know I've laid a lot on you. Mr. Boyle.
Yes, I also would support this. I know, Mr. Chairman, that you've been placed in a very difficult position, but I think all things considered, we are in exceptionally difficult times. We're feeling our way forward, groping to some extent in the dark on a very controversial issue. I've thought about this quite a bit. For those in the public who might not have had the chance to look at our board packet, it is gigantic. And there are so many different stages to this particular issue that it's been a struggle as well to get a full and clear and accurate picture of all the different positions. So giving an extra bit of time for that is, as well as settling what we know is a somewhat fraught procedural environment, which you clearly outlined. I would support the delaying this matter to a date.
Like to apply for the D4 tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Mr. Scher. Oh.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to postpone for 1 month, and we'll just add a suggestion that council for all parties may wish to get together and talk about process. There may be some ways that they can suggest to streamline the handling of a matter like this in a virtual environment without compromising anybody's ability to put forth the points that they want to put forth.
Any other comments from the board? Is there a desire to follow my recommendation, or is there more discussion that needs to occur? Oh, hold on, Mr. Williams, were you saying something?
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to postpone consideration of the rezoning request for 469, 479 Southwell Woodward, former Mountain King and Talmer Bank, to Wednesday, May 27, 2020.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Williams. Do we have a second?
Support.
Support by Mr. Scher. Is there any discussion at the board level about the motion before I take it to the public and allow those to opine? Seeing none, I will go to the public now. Conversations about the motion, and I would add that we are talking about the motion, so we are not talking about the merits of the rezoning nor the merits of holding our meeting tonight. I do see the applicant has his hand up. He will go first.
Guys, hi. Mr. Aid Marcus, 6750 Oak Hills Drive, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. So I guess my question is, on the motion to postpone, these rules were promulgated by the, governor and the attorney general herself and allowed for this mechanism. We've invested a lot of time and money to be here tonight. Things seem to be going smoothly. You were able to handle the agenda before this. I don't understand why we can't handle the agenda now. For the sole reason, because there's going to be a lot of comments from people. There's going to be a lot of comments regardless. And there's no guarantee that the governor is going to open up the stay-at-home order on May 27, 2020. It may be likely, maybe unlikely. Nobody knows anything these days, and nobody can guess at anything these days. I'm here. My attorney's ready to go. I'm ready to go. My architect's ready to go. All the people online are ready to go. So if the governor doesn't allow this to be open on May 27th, are you going to tell me come back in June, come back in July, come back in August? there's got to be some finality to this. I've been chasing this for a year and a half now.
Understood, Mr. Marcus, and I will break protocol by answering by saying that regardless of whether the stay-at-home order is lifted, loosened, or relaxed, this matter, in my opinion, will be heard on May 27th, whether in a virtual space or not. I am attempting to ensure that when it is heard, given the volume of comments and the sensitivity here, that we are doing it in a manner that allows you to have a very clear record going to City Commission. So there are no foibles there.
So you're giving me a date certain May 27th, but if it's a stay-at-home order, then we're going to be doing the same thing today. Why don't we just get it out of the way today? You're relying on the fact that there may not be a stay-at-home order. You're relying on the fact that, COVID doesn't increase and the stay-at-home order comes back into effect. You're going on a lot of assumptions that may or may not occur on May 27th.
To be clear, I'm not going on any assumptions. In fact, I'm stating for the record that if we are going to have a virtual meeting on May 27th, that virtual meeting is going to include this item. And it will be done virtually and it will be handled that day. So I am, for the record, indicating that we are delaying this 1 month in order to make sure that the process is done properly so that the applicant does not run into issues when moving forward to the City Commission. Are there other comments from the public that people would like to make? I do not see other hands going up.
Scott, if I may suggest, if we don't see any other hands, perhaps I could unmute all, just in case anybody's having trouble putting their hand up. What do you think of that?
I'm a little apprehensive to do that, Jana. I think that's part of what we have to work out, because that's going to be 59 people or 49 people all deciding whether they're going to talk at once and what is it.
Okay.
So I think we have to play with the hand we're dealt, and that's why we're dealing with what we're dealing right now. And you see Mr. Marcus has his hand up one more time. I will allow him one more comment.
Just thank you.
So Mr. Marcus.
Yes, thank you. So I guess I'm a little bit confused. If there is a stay-at-home order on May 27th, you're going to allow the video conference to happen regardless?
Yes.
Okay, so if you would allow the video conference to happen regardless, why don't you just allow it to happen today, I guess?
As I've explained it a number of times, it's because we are within the first hour of using this virtual system.
Right.
We are unsure of whether the public comment section is going as smoothly as it needs to be.
How do you know that?
The last thing, because we're going to have this meeting and the rest of another meeting afterwards in order to confirm that it's working.
But there's been city council meetings. There's been other meetings.
Mr. Marcus, let me just ask you this:
Sure.
Would you rather go to the City Commission with a verdict tonight that is muddled on the record and people come and argue, or would you rather go to the City Commission in 1 month when the planning board has provided every opportunity for the public to comment and your record is clear and complete?
But Mr. Klein, you've allowed the public to comment time and time and time again.
I understand.
Today was a date that I was prepared to go with. It is not fair to me because, you need more time to have this in person, whether it's in person or via Zoom meeting. The rules are the rules. We should play by the rules.
And I understand your concern and frustration, and I believe we are playing by the rules. We are simply trying to ensure that those rules are followed. And
if to follow the rules, you should have the meeting tonight, which was scheduled for tonight and noticed up for tonight. That's the rule.
Well, thank you. Your comment is certainly noted. I see no other hands raised. So at this point, I will bring it back to the board.
Didn't see it.
And I will ask for the roll to be called.
No.
Brian Williams? Brian Williams?
Yes.
Daniel Scher?
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce?
Yes.
Robin Boyle?
Yes.
Scott Klein?
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries?
Yes.
Bert Hosak?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Motion is unanimous. Thank you to all, to the applicants, to the general public. I understand that this is a difficult situation, but I do believe we have acted in the best interest of all parties here, and I appreciate your continued interest. We will be holding this meeting on May 27th to hold a public hearing on the rezoning for these properties. So let's move along to item G and H, which are two items, but they are for the same project. We have a special land use permit review and a final site plan and design review for 1800 West Maple, the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer. These are two separate approvals. They will require two separate motions, but they are so inexplicably linked that the board traditionally reviews these together. And therefore, unless I hear any concerns, we will continue that tradition. And with that, I believe, Brooks, you are up.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me and see my shared screen?
Yes.
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 Perfect. So the applicant is Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, which is located at 1800 West Maple, and they're applying for a final site plan review and a special land use permit amendment because the property is in an R1 zone, which permits religious institutions as long as they have a special land use permit. So the applicant is renovating 11,000 square feet of the church and creating an additional 3,700 square feet, which is an 8.3% increase. So the applicant doesn't need to have a CIS for that. Is my mouse showing up?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Perfect. So the property is surrounded by B1 parking and R1 on the east side. On the north side, it's surrounded by R2 zone, and then on the west side, it's surrounded by Bloomfield Township. In regards to screening required, because it's a parking lot, it's not required to have screening on the sides facing O1 and the parking to the east. But then along R1 and R2, on the Birmingham side, it received a variance in 1991 to have the wooden 6-foot fence that's currently there right now. And then in 2005, it received another screening variance for this section here, where there's no fence, but they got a variance to use vegetation as a screening mechanism for the residential space to the west. For landscaping, the applicant is removing some trees to accommodate for the expansion of the space, but they'll be planting new trees on the east side. I believe it's a total of 11 trees, as well as lining the new expansion with various assortment of vegetation and flowers. For parking, the applicant well exceeds the parking requirements for this type of space. It is of note that in 2005, they did receive a parking variance for this front space here. As you can see, this dashed line shows the 25-foot setback, and there are 4 spaces within that, and they got a variance to have those within the 25 feet, and they also received a variance to not have to put up a 32-inch brick screen wall in front of that. For lighting, the applicant is in an R1 zone and isn't subject to common commercial lighting requirements, but if they were, they meet all of the requirements for the foot candle ratio and the parking lot pole heights and such. Let's see. For access and circulation, they have 4 curb cuts. The ones on near the edges here and here provide access to the back. For this particular circulation, it's one way through here. The parking lot is being restricted a little bit, but it's still 20 feet for access at the entryway as they're expanding this building up front. And so the planning department wanted to make a note that while they're providing enhancements for the sidewalk to get from this front parking lot to the entrances at the front and the side, the applicant hasn't provided a type of pedestrian pathway from the public sidewalk here into the entrance of the front of the church, which they may wish to consider for discussion. For design review, see. This would be the main level. The enhancement is for a larger rehearsal room here, which will replace the columbarium. They plan to move the columbarium over to the east side of the sanctuary of the church. I spoke with the architect, and the church is working with a professional cemetery management firm, and they have more details on how that's done. They're also enhancing the welcome space called the narthex in the front, which is a kind of a waiting room going in and out of between services. They're also providing more seating room in these ambulatories on the east and west side. I believe they're also expanding the capacity for the balcony up here. The exterior is going to be brick to match what is existing right now. They are doing, they are using some EFIS material on the top around here above the columns, and so the planning board may wish to discuss, preferences in those type of materials. They also have some spandrel glass located on the west side of the facade facing the street, and down here they are removing a few windows to accommodate moving some of the office space over to this east side, which connects the sanctuary to the chapel. And with that, I leave it to you guys.
Thank you, Brooks. Looking to the board, are there any questions for Brooks related to the report? Mr. Boyle.
Never have I struggled with a site plan as this one. Brooks, could you take us back to the drawing which apparently indicates the new building? Is this dimensionally different than what is there today? And if so, could you point that out on this plan for me?
Yeah, I'm going to find that on the next page. So this is a more detailed of the first floor. So I'm going to scroll up page here. Then I'm going to zoom in. So the horizontal dashed lines show what is being proposed to be built, and the dashed line here shows what's currently there.
So in other words, they're demolishing a portion of that building and then building everything that is hatched, so to speak.
Correct. So the part of the columbarium here is going to be moved. This part is being knocked out to make room for the expansion of the sanctuary here.
So could you just be clear? This will include the demolition of this church as we know it on Woodward, on Maple.
That's my understanding. I think the architect will have a better detail of what everything they're taking down versus what will be left up during the expansion.
Okay.
I'm more so looking at the addition of the square footage.
And for the record, Brooks, what is that addition again? The change in square footage?
3,791 square feet.
Okay, so that at the end of the day, they're adding 3,900 square feet. Okay.
Yeah.
Are they adding any height?
No, the height, I believe, is remaining at 27 feet. Just measured to the middle of the pediment. Zoom out.
Okay.
So here's the last question, and I hope I don't sound off beam here. There's a steeple on top, correct?
Correct.
That steeple is therefore going to be removed carefully, laid down to one side. They're going to rebuild this church without adding any height, replacing the steeple on top. Am I right or am I wrong?
I believe the architect will have more specifications on how they're going to handle the construction with the steeple.
Okay?
Okay,
So, Mr.
That's
Boyle,
good.
we'll ask them.
I hope so. Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Let's see, Mr. Williams.
What is the existing square footage of the building? If you don't know, the architect can answer.
Off the
What I'm
top of my
trying to
head, I
ask
don't
you-
have.
I'm asking to follow up on Robin's point, what is, by square footage or percentage, how much are we adding?
They're adding an additional 8.3%.
8.3?
So, ballpark, I believe it's going from 45,000 square feet to 49.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of Brooks? Mr. Burke? Yes, Mr. Joseph.
Question. Brooks, you mentioned EFIS and spandrel glass. Are those things that are allowed by our ordinance?
They are allowed because it's in the R1 zone.
Okay.
Those are material listings for downtown that aren't allowed.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none from the board, I'd like to ask the applicant. Jana, is the applicant present? Do you?
Yes, Mr. Steve Schieneman.
Mr. Sheen.
Hopefully I said that correctly.
Schneeman. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you, Brooks, for running through and summarizing what we're proposing. If I could, I'll just give a brief summary, too, of what the project entails. Lutheran Church of the Redeemer has grown, and the existing sanctuary building that you probably have seen that faces Maple Road has, over the years, because of its age, become less and less sufficient for the needs of the current church and a modern congregation. However, the church is very, they love the facade that they have, they love the style of the church, and they love the property. And so therefore, our firm was tasked with essentially taking the aesthetic and the style that was so beloved by the congregation, but providing them with a more contemporary space that's usable for the modern congregation. So what that entailed was essentially a larger sanctuary oriented in a similar fashion as it faces Maple Road, with main entry doors facing Maple Road. They also needed some additional space for music and practice space. And so Brooks pointed out that there's some additional space there as well for that. As well as part of the demolition that's occurring is there's office space right now on the east side of the sanctuary. That's being removed and relocated into another portion of the building. Brooks noted that we're taking out a couple of windows there for that. I do want to address Mr. Boyle's question. The intent is to actually replace the steeple with a brand new steeple. So the steeple that we're showing in the drawings is actually a brand new custom steeple that we believe fits the aesthetic of the new church quite well. We are showing small amounts of EFIS on a couple of the gable ends on either side of the narthex, as well as the front portico. Those actually match the EFIS that's used on the north side of the building. Currently, there's a porte cochere that has a small amount of EFIS on it as well. So we're trying to match that aesthetic. And then as far as the spandrel glass is concerned that Mr. Kosick brought up, the two windows that are facing Maple on the first floor, the main level, to the east end of the narthex and to the west end of the narthex. Those are spandrel glass because they're rated egress stairs. And the spandrel glass allowed us to be able to detail that in such a way to maintain the rating intact.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the architect?
Mr. Chairman, it's Bert. I've got a quick question.
Please.
Brooks made, if you can go to the site plan, Brooks made a good observation, I thought, about connecting the public sidewalk to the front entry of this building. So we are a walkable community, and it looks like this is sort of the current condition, and maybe there is no connection, but is there any reason that that connection could not be included? And along with that, maybe speak a little bit about that drop off. So it's a little, I agree with you, Mr. Robin Boyle, that it was hard for me to understand these drawings, what's existing and what's proposed. But so it looks like the drop-off area is going to be pinched a little bit from what it currently does. There's a shaded area. Is that a change in material? Just describe that whole drop-off pickup zone, and again, if you could address that public sidewalk connection.
Sure. Mr. Schneemann, would you mind?
Yeah, I did have with regard to the sidewalk connection. I did have a conversation with a representative of the owner, and they would be happy to have connectivity between their pedestrian system on site and into the system along the north side of Maple. We had talked about the possibility of having that go along the arced parking spaces on the east side of the entry, roughly where Brooks has the mouse right now. So along there, connecting into Maple Road. So we would be happy to add that to the plan.
Great.
With regard to the drop-off space, that's actually being expanded slightly to accommodate the expansion of the building. Although you will note that the front of the building is not too much further south than it is now, but it does bump out a little bit further to the south. So we're expanding that. You'll see that in the engineering drawings from Nowak and Fraus that there is some cutting that's occurring along that south side of that drop-off zone, just a couple of feet.
The sidewalk that you talked about, would you duplicate that, mirror it on the west side as well?
We did not talk about doing two sidewalks. That's certainly a possibility. I guess I would have to ask, I think Mr. Steve Scheit is participating in the conversation currently, and I guess I could ask him that question.
I think it could be a good add. I mean, obviously, if I live to the west of the site, I'm not going to walk past the whole front to use the sidewalk on the east, and it would help those. I don't know if there's 10 parking spaces there or something. Those folks that park there and would have access to a sidewalk without walking in the drive or drop-off area. You might lose a spot there, it looks like, because there's a bit of a pinch point in the existing parking, but I think those would be good enhancements. To the site.
I see Mr. Scheit has raised his hand.
Added Steve Scheit, unmuted him and added his video if you wanted to ask him a question.
Yeah, Mr. Scheit, if you could just introduce yourself briefly and then perhaps comment as you were planning to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Steve Scheit. I'm a resident of the city of Birmingham. I live at 1289 North Glenhurst. I'm a member of the church that we're speaking about tonight, and for purposes of this conversation, I'm the owner's representative. Steve had mentioned earlier that Brooks had raised the concept of this public access off the south sidewalk, and we think that makes a lot of sense. We've never had it. People simply use the driveway, but we appreciate that's not the best solution. A walk would be better. We haven't had time to detail exactly where that would go. We're open to either side or both. There are some very large evergreens to the west, and we'd hate to lose those, but obviously we'll do what the board thinks makes sense. We are absolutely accessible to the community. That's very important.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kozak, would you find perhaps an administrative approval on something?
Sure. Absolutely.
Would that be acceptable?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Other questions for the applicant? Any from, is that Mr. Williams? Hold on a second.
I take it they are agreeing specifically to the sidewalk on the east side, and what you're requesting administrative approval as to whether there's going to be a sidewalk on the west side.
Yes, I guess I was saying that they could submit the sidewalk plans. Assuming we were going to push this forward tonight, that they could submit those sidewalk plans for staff to approve.
They've agreed to the sidewalk on the east side.
Okay.
Well, and I guess my comment would just be, I don't want to design it because I don't know where existing vegetation and curbs and other things are happening. So I trust staff. They understand obviously the intent. They brought it up. So just finding the best way to do that.
Great. Any other questions from the board? I am not seeing any. So at this time, I am going to go toward the public. Thank you, Mr. Scheit, Mr. Shaman. Appreciate your input. We're going to the public now. I do see one hand raised right now. I'm going to go to, looks like Mr. Bernowski. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Mr. Bobrowski, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Please provide
my name is John Bobrowski. I live at 210 North Glenhurst. I'm in the Bloomfield Township side, directly to the west of the church. I've lived there since the year 2000. I have lived through several construction projects associated with the church. And particularly right now, I have some concerns about what appears to be the substantial demolition of the church and the rebuilding of the church in 3,000 square feet during a time where I may be required to shelter at home. I'd like to know when this will begin. I would like to know what will be the effect of the construction on the west side of the church. In the past, through construction projects in the church, I can tell you that despite the start time that routinely contractor vehicles would be idling in the parking lot before the start time, and they would work up until the last moment that they could. Now, I'm not here to tell the church what to do, but as a resident and a neighbor of the church, I am not really keen about having to shelter in place during a pandemic while a building next to me is being demolished. And I guess I'm also concerned about where will the vehicles and other demolition equipment be stored? Is all this stuff going to be essentially behind my backyard in the west side of this facility? This is the first we've seen the plans, we've seen the notice, but of course, up until this moment, we had no idea that the sleepy, quaint church that I moved into next to in the year 2000 was going to be torn down and replaced substantially with another building.
Thank you, Mr. Bobrowski. I appreciate your input. Let's go to, if I might ask, first of all, with regard to the shelter at home, the current executive order does not allow any construction activities unless those are considered critical infrastructure. I'm going to throw over to the architect and perhaps the owner's rep now to answer a couple of questions from the applicant. Is it your intention that this would begin as some sort of critical infrastructure project. And regardless of that, when it does, please explain a little bit about how you plan to mitigate issues for neighbors. Have you thought about staging, et cetera, please?
Yes, I can speak to that. The current schedule, which obviously has some uncertainty built into it now because of the shelter-in-place orders, was to have the project start later this year, late fall. With the delay that's happening and the delay certainly in the construction industry with non-essential projects, there's a question mark there whether or not it would start this fall or not. But the initial plan was to have it start this fall. I can't speak to whether or not there will still be shelter-in-place orders by this fall, but if there are, and it's not considered an essential infrastructure project, then it certainly would not begin construction even in the fall. With regard to staging and construction vehicles, we certainly would expect the construction manager to conform to all of the noise ordinance and regulations within the city of Birmingham. And if there is something specific, I know that the church is very keen to maintain good relationships with the neighbors. We can look at the possibility of creating staging in such a way that minimizes any noise that would potentially be impacting any of the neighbors on any of the sides. And I will say, too, that is the intent of the church that during construction, they want to continue using the facility for regular church meetings. So the parking lot will need to remain accessible and a large portion of it remain clear as well. So the staging will take that into account as well.
Okay. So my suggestion to you from our past experience would just be as you go through your permitting process, as you go through your construction startup, that you make special efforts to reach out to your neighbors, build that relationship, work with them on any issues to avoid having to get the city involved is usually the way things work best in our community.
Indeed.
Any other comments? Mr. Scheid, I see your hand is up. Is that, would you like to?
Yeah, just wanted to add, Chairman Klein, we absolutely hear what you're saying. We actually had a neighbor meeting on Thursday, March 12th, invited people over for coffee and a look at the plans. Of course, that was literally as we were closing down, public meetings, group meetings. So we weren't able to have that with the neighbors, but we've appointed someone to manage that. We've created an electronic chat group to share ideas, not just on the pre-planning stage, but during construction so that people have a vehicle to pass comments along. We're very sensitive to the noise issues, the staging issues, and we want to be a good neighbor. It's a multi-user facility, so we have to accommodate our own members, but also the neighbors. They're all around us. We're on three sides, and we've done this before, and we take that to heart.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public? I'm looking, I see no hands up at the moment, going one scroll, two scrolls around the room. Seeing none, we will bring it back to the board. Thank you, Mr. Scheit, Mr. Schneemann. I appreciate your input. Board, is there any conversation to be had? Mr. Boyle.
Yes, I'm not in a mood to in any way object to what's happening, but I do think that there's a lesson to be learned here.
Okay.
When we open this item, it begins.
It's all right. I can talk with Dan about this. I'd like to see that.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Boyle, I apologize. Please continue.
I think there's something to be taken from this that we need to think about. The second sentence in our element here in terms of this particular site plan is, quote, the applicant is proposing an addition to the church to accommodate a larger sanctuary space, and then it goes on. It was only in questioning that I was able to ascertain that this building would be demolished. That's number one. Number two, there was also the first element raised by the neighbour was on programming of construction and the like. Exactly the sort of material that might have been gathered if we had asked for more information. I'm not asking for a community impact study because I realised this particular development didn't trigger the 20,000 square feet. But it does raise issues about how we handle an issue that is resulting in the demolition of a very prominent building on Maple in our city. I just want to put on the record the fact that I think to some extent we were misled in terms of what we were seeing in front of us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Any other comments from the board? I do not see any hands. Is there any desire for questions of the applicant, or is there a motion in our future? Everyone's on mute. Look at that. Board, I think we've heard quite a bit. Is there anything else we would like to hear, or is there more deliberation that needs to be made? No one has any comments? Mr. Scheer, are you trying to talk?
I'm trying to talk, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, not your problem. I'd be happy to make a motion. My difficulty is that because of the technological setup, one of the things I've discovered is I don't have access to my materials. I have to figure out a way around that, which I think I can. But I'm a little bit disadvantaged because I don't have, whatever pages it is that the write-up is and a suggested motion might be aren't accessible to me. So if somebody else is likewise inclined to say this is okay to go forward, maybe they've got access.
Excellent. Ms. Whipple-Boyce, you're raising your hand.
I have access. It just took me a minute to find it. But I'm happy to make a motion.
Please.
And it appears that motion will be to recommend approval to the City Commission for the final site plan for 1800 West Maple, and to recommend approval to the City Commission for the special land use permit amendment.
So we have a dual motion for...
Unless you prefer I do them separately.
Well, you've made a motion. Is there anybody that is seconding that, or would the board like to let the motion fall to the wayside and start over?
I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Jeffries. So a motion, Ms. Whipple-Boyce, second, Mr. Jeffries, for both the final site plan and the special land use permit. Are there any comments from the board on the motion?
Question?
Mr. Kozak first.
So are we looking at, you said final site plan. Is that what we're looking at? I mean, we don't have the materials and colors and details and all that other good stuff.
Brooks, Jana, I believe that's how it is noticed, is it not?
Yes, it is noticed as a revised final site plan. Brooks, do you have the materials?
I'm not sure we can pass them around, quite frankly.
Are they the same as what's on the building?
That's what was,
Well, I need to hear that. I need someone to convey that, and I sort of agree with Robin. It's the existing building is a very pretty building, and so I would obviously hope that this continues to make for a very pretty building. But but we, I haven't walked up to the building anytime recently. Is it traditional brick? Is it Flemish bond? Are you matching it? I see some coins or some final site plan approval. We do dive into that stuff. Like it shows a black roof here. Well, what is that?
I, 'cause, I, 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 Yes, we are highlighting in this first meeting the limitations of the virtual world. I do want to remind us all that we do have a motion that we should be sticking to and not getting back into a discussion. Unless so, I'd like to see if there are any other comments. It seems like there's some concern about the motion. Are there any other comments related to the motion before we take it to the public and come back for a vote on the motion? Mr. Williams.
Yeah, I guess I agree with Robin and Bert. I personally don't think it's appropriate at this time to get final site plan approval and because I don't think they've complied with what we typically request at final approval time. Either because they didn't submit it or they didn't know it. It doesn't really matter to me. We don't have it.
Okay. Ms. Whipple-Boyce. Ms. Whipple-Boyce first, and then we'll.
Thanks. Are we looking at, in my recollection in the body of the description of all of this, there were notes about these being matching materials, and then fortunately someone highlighted the material list for us here. So I was under the impression they were matching materials. Now, do we still require a material board be submitted, like we sometimes get with all of the materials on there, if they've called them out in the plans like they have here? And maybe we should ask the architect, the applicant, if they are indeed matching, because it's my recollection that that was what was in the body of the prepared material.
Thank you, Ms. Whipple-Boyce. Jana, I think you were going to make a comment.
Yes, I was just going to say exactly.
Oh.
Materials were listed in the report. I didn't have the report in front of me, but they are listed again on this plan sheet that is on your screen. And they did indicate that they were all going to match existing. To be fair, we don't have a standard where we make them provide materials every time when it's matching existing. I'd say when it's matching existing, we mostly don't. But I don't think it's clearly spelled out anywhere. I do have some other folks who did ask if they could submit photos of the samples through because of the virtual meeting process, and I think that would make sense for new materials. But this is matchings, but I would leave it up to you.
Okay. Well, we do have a motion on the floor, so I think we're going to have to take this to the public and then come back and vote on the motion, and then we'll see where we go from there. Understanding the limitations that we have been dealt. So I will, at this point, quickly go to the public related to the motion itself. And again, we're not referring to the plans, but the motion itself. I see, we'll start with, well, Mr. Stamen, you have a comment?
I only wanted to say that indeed we are matching all of the existing materials, brick as well as the paint colors and the roofing. That is the intent, to match what's there today.
Thank you. Mr. Bobrowski.
I think the concern is, as one of the board members suggested, that I don't know whether it was clear to any of the folks that live around here that what we were looking at is a substantial demolition of an existing building and the replacement of a building, whether or not you're matching the material that has been substantially demoed. That would be a concern for me, but the concerns that I expressed are the ones that I expressed earlier.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bobrowski. I appreciate it. Any other comments from the public on the motion? I see none, so we will bring it back to the board. Brooks, if you're there, or Jana, if you could do me a solid. I want to understand quickly before we call the roll, the existing square footage of the building, the square footage being demolished, and the square footage being constructed. Comments tonight have led me in several different directions.
Brooks, that one's for you.
I'm trying to find it. Let's see. It's on page A101. Existing building that will remain during the construction, 37,000 square, new building addition, 11,000. Total is 49,140. So 49.
Okay. So very quickly, what we have here essentially is a 45,000 square foot building in round numbers. They're demolishing 8,000 square feet of that, and they're building 11,000 back. Does that seem about correct? And I'm going to look at Mr. Schneemer to just confirm my general numbers there.
Yes, generally that's correct.
Okay. So
From 45 to 49.
Okay. So we have a motion. We've been to the public. We're back. Let us call the roll on this motion to see where we go from here.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
Yes.
Bert Kozak,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Yes.
Brian Williams,
Yes.
Robin Boyle,
No.
Scott Klein.
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. And good luck to you. Please do take to heart the comments of the resident and the neighbors. I know you've certainly professed to do so, and I look forward to a successful project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Excellent. All right. We had our Elm Street project has been postponed already, so therefore we have moved to the miscellaneous business and communications. Jana, anything else or administrative approval wise that we need to discuss?
No, we don't have anything else at this time.
Any questions from the board on that, on any of those? Seeing none, let's talk our draft agenda for the meeting on May 13th, 2020.
Well, as you know, tonight we postponed, which one was it? The Elm Street, 219 Elm Street, both the community impact study and the preliminary site plan review. So that will take up 2 spots on the agenda. And as you know, that's a study session. So I do think we need a motion to amend the rules of procedure, or sorry, to...
Well, Jana, that was actually included in the motion to postpone.
A room for 5 things. That's 2 of them. We'll have room for 3 more. It is study session. We have several items that are there on hold. The chairman and I were talking. We have a couple of ideas for things that we would like to consider addressing. Did you want me to go through those?
Yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 that we had talked about, perhaps quickly discuss it next time.
One of them in particular was having a discussion with the board about how we would like to restart the master plan public input process. Obviously, we put it on hold given the pandemic. And so we want to talk, we don't know when we would start it up, but we definitely want to talk through how we would do that, especially given that we had 2 experiences at the 2 meetings with the public comment. So discuss how things went, how we could do it a little differently if we need to, that kind of discussion. We thought that would be one. And then the other item that we might want to talk about is this whole virtual meeting system. Now that we're doing it, now that we've gone through our first meeting, obviously we had a lot of things on the agenda, at least originally, how we can make it a little smoother, how we can improve it. If there are things that you think we should do or shouldn't do we need to amend our rules of procedure in any way to accommodate the virtual meetings? I think that's another area we might want to think about discussing.
Great. Any input from the board on that? I think, Mr. Williams, before I go to you, just my comment on the master plan would be that our intention is to simply try and have a frank discussion about how the first 2 meetings went. I think it's my opinion, the first meeting went quite well. The second meeting is, well, we'll just call it a planning dumpster fire in many respects. And I take full weight of that on my shoulders, but I don't wish to repeat that 4 more times and then sit at the end of the day having not accomplished anything. So I would hope we'd be able to to spend some time talking about how we might improve that process and whenever it may start. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, can I ask Jana when the next virtual joint meeting of the planning board and the city commission is scheduled?
Well, I don't know, if it'll be a virtual meeting or not. I'm just looking on my calendar. They're generally held in June. I don't know that I have a date for it at this point, only because I do not have the city calendar in front of me, and it is not yet in my personal schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and guess it would be June 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th.
So let me.
Thanks, Jana. Way to go on a limb.
Yeah.
Let me make a suggestion. I agree that we should reconnoiter and see where we are in the master planning process and maybe come to some conclusions. But I think before we would continue, based on the timing of that being in the meeting likely to be in June, that we would schedule a joint meeting with the city commission so that if we are to embark on 4 more meetings, that we at least get, quote, buy-in from the city commission with their input as to how they think it's gone so far and what changes, if any, both bodies think are appropriate to be made in the future. I really don't want to go. I concur in your judgment as to the last meeting. I would have used different words, but inappropriate for a public meeting. I would like to see us meet and discuss it in May, but I would also like the joint meeting to deal with the master planning process itself. There's nothing more important long-term on our agenda, and so I think, and I'm not sure, frankly, that we've had the kind of meaningful back and forth with the new city commission. We did with the old commission, but not with the new members of the commission, I don't believe.
No, great point, Mr. Williams. Right. Any other comments from the board? Any other new business for this evening? Mr. Boyle.
I don't know whether this is appropriate, and you can tell me to stop. I don't want to cause trouble. I definitely don't. But it's in regard to 219 Elm Street. On reading the material, there is a difference of 10 years between the material that is presented and the date that we're reviewing it. And I know why that is, obviously, because the original All Seasons building was required to do a community impact study. Is that allowed? Is something that was originally presented for another property, another development, allowed to be presented for a new building, even though it is adjacent? Or should this be something we should discuss when the matter is actually on the agenda?
I don't think it appropriate to discuss it tonight since it's not on the agenda. However, I think it's highly appropriate if you could contact Jana offline and help. I didn't quite catch what your concern is, but I am concerned enough to think that if you could talk with Jana about that, then she can look into it appropriately and be prepared for the next meeting. Would that make sense, Mr. Boyle?
Yeah, good. I like that. I can do that.
Thank you.
Chairman, can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
Like the church we just saw, the drawings for Elm were very difficult to understand. It did not show context. It did not show adjacencies. I went over there today. I walked the site. I still can't understand it, and we should not. It's not our job to imagine what this stuff is going to be. So, is it smoke and mirrors, and somebody's not providing the information because? I'll give you an example. How does this connect to the abutting property to the east? I couldn't figure it out. Are these separate? Are they So I guess my comment would just be, Janet, so to the benefit of the people that are submitting an application, I'm going to have a tough time next time we come together if that material looks like it does.
Good point. I will admit some difficulty on my end, understanding how the surface parking lot and the adjacent properties interconnected or didn't.
But again, a simple, like the buildings to the across the street on Elm.
Yeah.
I don't think they're represented in any drawing. And those buildings are there and they're not changing and they're good buildings. And how does this all relate if the information's not there?
Or the houses.
Or the houses, yes. So, and it wasn't for lack of pages and pages of information.
Fair enough.
Sorry, Donna.
All right. Any other business before us here today?
A quick question for you, Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, please.
For you, as you're running the meeting, is it easier for you to see us if we raise our hands electronically or if we kind of just go like this on the screen?
I'm going to be honest with you, and this is one thing we could talk about. I think on the screen is easier. The way the participants are listed, it is a long list, alphabetical by first name. And so I have to constantly scroll through. And tonight we had nearly 50, 55 people at one point. So I was consistently scrolling back and forth to try and find hands. Your names don't all pop out, particularly those of you using assumed names on your screen name here. So it was challenging. So I think raising the hand as you would is easier. Dan, you using the electronic was easy because you happen to be on the first page all the time. So,
yeah.
But
I'm also a little confusing because I've got probably two names in there.
Right. Stuart.
It usually doesn't really matter that on the screen, when they're doing the share screen, that they are exactly on what we need to see. But I think somebody was saying they're having trouble doing a motion because we weren't on that page. I think we're going to have to maybe get a little better at trying to get on the page that's going to be the most relevant at the point of the meeting that we're at. I think it would be helpful. I've got two things going on here, but then my tablet keeps timing out.
Right.
So I know it's a pain in the ass, but if we could just maybe...
Language.
Sorry.
I could have beeped that, but I didn't know how.
Yeah, like we could have the motions up when we need to see the motions and going back to the agenda at the end of the meeting and that kind of stuff.
No, that's a fair point. And things that we have to work through, which is why this first meeting is as challenging as it was, even though I think that in many respects it did go fairly well. I am concerned. I don't know how the public input is going. I had some hands up. I'm assuming that they are working, but I have to trust the technology, I suppose.
Yeah.
Jana, one thing that I would add, and then everybody can provide their input, even via email, is it was very clear to me that individuals coming into the meeting had the ability to unmute themselves and to turn their own video on. I don't know if we can control that, but at one point I lost all of the planning board members and I had 9 people from the public. Well, I had no idea who they were, but I had their videos up and I was hearing them. I actually also heard some rather choice words when certain decisions by this board were being considered that I don't think they realized they were not on mute. Things that perhaps we can just learn from and try and improve on for our next meeting.
I would totally agree with that. And they were supposed to come in without video and being muted. So I don't think that occurred in every case. It did in many, but not in all. So we'll have to look into that, and maybe our IT department can help us out a bit there and see what we can do.
By no means do I wish to complain. I mean, given what we've tried to do here, I'm quite frankly surprised that it went as it did, but always can do better.
I have a concern that that Stewart's sitting in the middle of Maryland Woodward, and I know there's a lot
What
of
happens when
traffic
people
out there,
start driving?
but be careful out there.
Yeah.
He's not within 6 feet of anybody.
I want to know what those little figures are behind Bert.
What's that? Yeah, it's. I'll invite you over someday. So it's called Mickey Mouse.
All right.
Hey, Bert, I can fix my background for you.
You know what, Mr. Jeffries, that might get you muted. And with that, we are perilously close to issues here. I am going to thank you all for your participation. And meeting adjourned.
Bye, y'all.
All right.
Have a good night.